welcome to this month's episode of Fintech Firebrand. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research, and I'm here to chat to you about this month's Fintech and FinReg news. Now, it's July, so the summer months tend to usually mean a bit of a slowing down in regulatory news. Unfortunately, I guess for some this year, it doesn't seem to have happened. It's been a busy start to the month with some roundtables, lots of different publications coming out ahead of, I guess, the summer break for some of the European regulators in particular. So this week, I attended a session organised by the European Securities and Markets Authority on the European move to T+1 trade date plus 1 day settlement cycle from the current of T+2, as I've talked about multiple times on these episodes. Interestingly, there was a lot of different sessions during that half-day event discussing some of the lessons learned in the US, what we can apply to Europe from the US. Obviously, very different market structures, much more complexity in the EU that needs to be taken into account. Also looking at possibly a time frame, a timetable for moving, and discussion about some of the lessons learned by the UK task force as well that could be applied to the EU. So a lot of interesting discussions there. Last month, I probably mentioned I went along to the T+1 UK task force event, and there was a lot of discussion with the working groups there. This time it was more of an EU lens on everything, although there was some discussion with the UK and with the US. It was certainly interesting to hear from the European Commission. They expect that there's going to be small delays in terms of clarity on some of the massive pieces of regulation in flow at the moment, and T+1 being one decision that will be made by the next commission rather than the commission that is currently in situ or that is currently being replaced. With the appointments coming, we've seen one appointment. Von der Leyen has been proposed for the Commission again this year. So we'll see if that gets finally approved. We're waiting for those approvals now. Interesting to see with regards to T+1, a lot of discussion about some of the funding and liquidity challenges that have been happening with the US market from the international and EU investor perspective. Noted by some of the trading desks of buy-side firms, Thursdays have become extremely expensive, well, much more expensive than the other days of the week for trading because of the disparity between misalignment between settlement cycles in the US and in the EU. So interesting to see that happening. Otherwise, there's been a relatively smooth transition thus far, though we've not seen much volatility in the markets. So it'll be interesting to see coming into the US election madness, whether things change there. Certainly, there is an anticipation that there may be an uptick in fails, but I think there's going to be a lot of discussion ongoing in the EU about some of the nuances of the markets with regards to how we tackle the fact we'll need to move fixed income and equities to a T+1 cycle. In the US, the fixed income markets were already on a shorter settlement cycle, so they didn't need to move. It was only equities, whereas in the EU and the UK and well, in some of the other markets, we'll need to change that, unfortunately. So there's going to be a bit of a change for the markets there. Certainly, a lot of discussions were had. Interesting to note that there's some concern about the governance body with regards to who will lead the charge. In the US, it was quite obviously going to be DTCC as the main CSD or the only CSD in the market. In Europe, we've got a lot to choose from. So who's going to be stepping up to lead the charge? And how do you coordinate across so many different market infrastructures? Will it be ESMA themselves that take the lead as the hub for information for everybody to look to for clarity, or will it be an industry body? A lot of questions outstanding on that front. So certainly very interesting discussions. Another related but interesting development is CSDR Refit that's currently ongoing at the EU level. More consultations out at the moment looking at improving the data that is being published out by the CSDs. As Firebrand have noted with some of our research, it's actually quite hard to sift through the data and understand settlement fails and have comparable data across the different market infrastructures. A lot of that data is not public as well. It does go to the regulators, but even the regulators have been having problems with it. So certainly there's more activity going on there. There's also an aspect of the consultation related to settlement penalties and providing more clarity around which settlement fails may not be in scope for penalties, such as when the CSD is attacked by a cyber attack, for example, or is knocked out, has an outage. Any settlement fail in that circumstance obviously would not have a penalty. So lots of interesting developments to sift through before, I think, October or September. There's a consultation period coming out around that too. On the green financing front and to do with climate risk, very interesting blog out this month from the European Central Bank that I read. Very well worth reading if you haven't read it, looking at some of the dependency supply chain risks related to the minerals that must be used for the green financing transition. So looking at some of those precious minerals and the resources and where they're concentrated globally, and the potential for collusion around pricing, particularly around, sort of access of foreign countries into mining those minerals or being able to use those minerals or buying them from those individual countries. So a lot of interesting developments there. Interesting to see there's discussion about China as well, particularly with the African markets, lots of influence there. Geopolitics is a bit of a hot potato at the moment, as we all know. So certainly interesting to see from the ECB perspective, how do we minimize those risks? What kinds of tactics can be factored into sort of modeling the supply chain and trying to progress forward, particularly as we move to more sustainable methods of energy. So, and a lot of those will be dependent on things like magnesium and zinc and the like. So interesting to see that as a particular aspect of climate risk and supply chain risk that must be monitored going forward. On the fintech front, some interesting research out by Goldman Sachs this month, particularly on the buzzy topic that I think every episode this year I've mentioned, generative AI. Less bullish than the valuations would give you rise to think, but Goldman Sachs has published a report that says it expects generative AI to impact less than 5% of the industry's tasks in the near term. So certainly a lot of different opinions on generative AI, but this one's particularly bearish on the short-term impacts of generative AI and its potential profitability. So certainly it'll be interesting to see how reports in this vein may impact valuations of companies such as NVIDIA going forward. I know there's already been a drop and in that space in terms of the valuation of that company. Will it drop further is a big question. The long-term impact of generative AI has been a topic at nearly every event I've been to. AI in general, large language models have been a focus for the industry for quite some time now. It's been around with us for quite a while, over a decade and more. Arguably, some AI has been in force since the 70s, so certainly it isn't a new technology, but the iterations of it are certainly interesting in terms of their developments. But watch this space for how research and developments around generative AI progress over 2024. And now, being a Brit, I can't not mention the UK election. Obviously took a lot of industry attention over the last month or so with the voting at the start of this month. We have seen a change in government. There's a lot of questions about what that means for the city. Certainly there's a lot of positivity, I would say, from some of the city members with regards to the changeover of prospects, with particularly looking at the relationship with the EU. Obviously, we are still Brexited, so we're not part of the EU, but hopefully there will be some change in circumstance in terms of negotiations, possibly more alignment with the EU, which should be an interesting development with regards to things like T+1. And there's a lot of interest in the new sort of green financing initiatives that may be coming out of the Labour government now. So could be big changes ahead. We're certainly very early days at the moment, but interesting to see that they have reached out very actively to the industry thus far. We've got a new city minister, that's Tulip Siddiq, that will be taking on the mantle to negotiate and discuss different topics with the industry going forward. Now, I've talked about talent quite a few times before, but interesting session this month at a Q15 event, Quorum 15 event that one of my friends, Joy McKnight, was hosting, with a lot of different experts looking at how to reduce intergenerational conflicts within the workplace. Now, I think we have around about 4 generations in the workplace at the moment. So right from baby boomers down to the newest graduates that have joined us, Generation Z, I believe they are now. And certainly that's something that can be challenging to manage. There can be conflicts largely because of a lack of understanding between sort of different experiences in their personal lives. People that haven't grown up with laptops, computers, phones, all of these different things, personal devices, versus those that don't know what life is like without them. And the idea of using a paper-based A to Z is alien, for example, let alone fax machines. So interesting to see listen to some conversations on the topic of how to minimize that conflict. And I think one of the main points there was to try and avoid stereotyping. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the characteristics of different generations. Not everybody is going to be characteristic of their generation. And certainly there's a lot of important things to think about in terms of what you can learn, both from older generations and younger generations coming into the workplace, new ways of working, different ways of thinking about older problems, and also learning from the history of what's happened in that workplace and the reasons why certain things have happened. So certainly I think it's a change of mindset to thinking that you can learn some degree of openness and collaboration and discussion in a sort of non-conflicting atmosphere. No fear in asking questions as well. So a lack of judgment around that, I think, is very important. So some things to bear in mind, but certainly was very interesting discussion. And I think this topic will continue to grow and grow as we focus more and more on talent and how to retain and attract talent within our industry in various sectors. And I know that's very challenging in certain areas like operations. So some things to chew on for the month.